All right, welcome in everyone. Thank you so much for being here for the virtual discussion, otherwise known as a Lunch and Learn with Craft Lake City and guest artisan Andrew Jensen, where we're going to talk about our newest exhibition, Celebration of the Hand, Emergence. My name is Tiana Young. I'm the Artisan and Programs Manager with Craft Lake City, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. Before we get started, just a few quick items of business. So please keep your microphone muted so that all attendees can hear the presentation. You can turn on captions at the bottom of the screen using the live transcripts button. And what questions do you have? We want to hear from you. This is meant to be an interactive discussion, so please don't be shy in sharing or asking any questions. If you do have a question, we just ask that you please type it in the chat and we will address them during the Q&A portion of the presentation towards the end of the event. Finally, we will have a post-event feedback survey that will drop in the chat towards the end of the event as well. That would really help us out as a nonprofit. Hearing your feedback really helps us improve these events and helps us serve you a little bit better. A little bit about Craft Lake City. So for those of you who maybe have not heard of us before, Craft Lake City is a 501c3 local arts nonprofit with a mission to educate, promote, and inspire local artisans while elevating the creative culture of the Utah arts community through science, technology, and art. A couple of ways that we do this is through our year-round programming and seasonal events, such as our largest event of the year, the annual DIY Festival, recently just had our 17th anniversary this past August. And next year's is set for August 7th, 8th, and 9th, 2026 at the Utah State Fair Park. There's over 500 local artisans and makers, Kid Row exhibitors, performers, kind of any definition of maker participants. And it takes place at the Utah State Fair Park each year to celebrate creativity in Utah. The second largest event that we have is our 7th annual Craft Lake City Holiday Market, which the call for entries are open right now until tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. And this is another marketplace that we host in partnership with the Ogden arts scene. So it helps elevate Northern Utah's creative community, and it's set for December 5th and 6th at the Union Station in Ogden. We also have our year-round DIY and craft workshops. Some upcoming classes include wax seals, patchmaking, plein air, watercolor, and more. You can preview the schedule and get tickets at craftlakecity.com/workshops. And not pictured here, but we do also have a Letter West conference where it celebrates all things hand lettering. It's coming up April 10th and 11th, 2026, in partnership with Midvale, Maine Arts and Culture District, and it really explores all things hand lettering. So from mural making to tattoo artists to digital letters and kind of everything in between. And then of course we have our curation projects, which is what we're here to talk about today. First, we have our Celebration of the Hand series, which is where we partner with local artisans such as Andrew to curate these beautiful pieces of artwork that are displayed in downtown Salt Lake City, right in front of Squatter, so between 300 West and 300 West and 300 East on 300 South. There are 14 total. The other iteration we do of this really awesome project is called Local Voices, where we partner with local mission-driven organizations and businesses to spread messages and amplify those messages that matter in an artful way. And they're always free. They're displayed 24/7. So we encourage you to pop over and see right now the installation that we're talking about today. So to meet today's speakers, it's my honor to introduce. I already introduced myself, so we're gonna go over to Jeremy Johnson, our programs administrator, who played a really big part in organizing this exhibition and helping make this possible.
Cool. Thanks, Tiana. So yeah, my name is Jeremy Johnson. I'm the programs administrator here at Crawford City. I had a hand in helping Andrew put together this installation. I'm super excited to talk about it. Um, we will also have our director popping in eventually sometime, but Angela H. Brown. So we have Angela, Tiana, and myself will be kind of running this conversation. And then Our artist for the installation is Andrew Jensen, and Andrew Jensen is a software engineer, creative technologist, makes code that makes arts. His work explores the fuzzy boundaries that exist between opposites, organic and synthetic, analog and digital, order and chaos, nature and computation. That is a lot, and I'm excited to talk about it. And then just a quick, brief rundown of what generative art is. There's a short description we wanted to use. Generative art is art that has been created in whole or in part with the use of an autonomous system. The autonomous system is independently determines features of an artwork that would otherwise require decisions made directly by the artist. These systems are algorithms made up of predefined rules, procedural logic, and randomness, which can lead to outputs that are dynamic, unique, and unexpected.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Andrew, could you boil this generative art description down to maybe somebody who has never heard of it and maybe aren't as familiar with these very expert level terms?
I would love to. So, hi everybody. I'm Andrew. Really, really grateful to be here, and thank you to Craft Lake City. So, I would break this down by emphasizing that phrase autonomous system. That sounds kind of scary, kind of unknown to us, but there's that other word, algorithms. And we interact with algorithms all the time when we just use our phones. The number one algorithm that we probably interact with is social media as we're scrolling through our news feeds and that sort of thing. Algorithms sound fancy, but they're really not. They're really just like logic that goes into a computer that then gets used later on. So generative art really is all about creating something in a computer that then gets programmed or gets scheduled. Programming literally means scheduling the computer to do something. And then that comes out the other end. That's an output. Um, it might be draw a line, draw a line when I click the button, and it'll draw a line. Or it might be roll a virtual dice in the computer, and if I get an even number, then draw a horizontal line. And if I get, what did I say, odd? If I get odd, then draw horizontal. If I get even, then draw vertical, right? And you can start to build up bigger and bigger systems that rely on logic in the computer that you've written through code or through other means, that are autonomous, and that ends up creating art. The the person that interacts with that system is collaborating with that system.
Way cool. So it kind of leans into that part of our, from what I understand, it's like that, like ping pong, almost like the truly like collaborating with both art. It's like mixing art and science and technology in this really, really cool way. Thank you for breaking that down. Admittedly, I was the one who needed support in fully understanding the breakdown of all of this really cool, um, these this cool process that you use to create these stunning pieces.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, with that, actually, after this, I'm gonna hand it off to Andrew, and he's gonna go into a little bit more depth of kind of the history, inspiration, and some of the stuff that he's utilized, and kind of give some of that information that I think would be helpful. Let me, so whenever you're ready, you can share your screen, Andrew.
Yep. And then if you want to unshare your screen, there we go. I'm making sure that I can share my sound, so we're ready to go there. Okay. And you should be able to see my screen at this point. Okay, so yeah, these will just be some quick slides from me to sort of set the stage for what we're talking about today. For those that are maybe not familiar with the idea of generative art, the idea of kind of smushing together technology and art, here's my take on it. I recognize that it's filtered through my own biases and my own experience in it, but I think this should hopefully help us to kind of frame the conversation that we have. The first thing, of course, that I want to talk about is thank you to Craft Lake City. So really grateful I could be a part of this. grateful that I could have my art in such a public place as downtown Salt Lake City. I've heard from at least one or two, I think two other people, that they walk past these placats every day on the way to work, or from their apartment downtown, and it's so special to get to contribute to the backdrop of their day, right? It's really neat to be involved in that way. So thank you. And again, I'm Andrew. I describe myself as a software engineer and a creative technologist. We can talk more about that idea there. But yeah, I'm from Utah, born and raised. Currently live in Orem. Grew up in American Fork and Cedar Hills. Went to school at Brigham Young University. Have worked for several tech companies in Utah. And yeah, that's all been a wonderful experience to me. Grateful to be a local to Utah. And we've talked, about kind of my professional background. My day job is in software, working for software companies. But in the meantime, I've been very interested in visual art and in music and in using technology to create both of those things. Creative technologist, what that means for me is that I like taking machines and then doing creative things with them. So today we're looking at art made with pen plotter robots or drawing machines. Other things that I enjoy using are like modular synthesizers and I don't know, things like that. It's great. Uh, that journey for me with creating generative art began a few decades ago in high school. I discovered this tool called processing.org. It's still around today. It's a great resource for using code to create art. A lot of folks use that as their primary tool to create generative art. Began to learn about that, tinkered off and on for several years, and then about 8 years ago, I showed a coworker of mine at a previous company, and he's a professional fine artist and a graphic designer. And he looked at my work and he said, "This is great. This is a good piece that you've got here on the screen. You should trace it because if you trace it and you make it exist in the physical world, and you've got those artifacts of actually being on the page, it's going to add that level of kind of grit and interest that's going to take it to the next level." And soon after that, I learned about the pen plotter art community and ended up getting my own, and my art has kind of gone from there. It's been a really exciting process from there. So, speaking of the process, let me show you a quick video. This is a very quick, like less than a minute long video that I've crunched together to show how one of these pieces was put together. You're going to see it in three phases, so be looking for those. You'll see these written in the corner. Phase one is code. I code it. Phase two is curate. I will run the code a bunch of times and pick my favorite outputs. And then number three is draw. Once I've chosen my very favorite, I will draw that with my robot. So let's watch that now. Great. So that's the process video. I see that we've got a question in the chat from Tiana. Thanks. And Tiana's question is, how long did it take to do this from the beginning to end? And I have a hard time answering that in a clear way. Let me do my best. Uh, the simplest answer, I guess, is uh, this drawing takes about 45 minutes to create. This was sped up to 100 times, and you may or may not have seen that. I actually put a couple of cuts in there. You saw some things kind of fade in where the arm of the pen plotter wasn't actually drawing. It's kind of a slow process as it needs to draw everything. Now is probably a good time to mention that these pen plotter machines are sort of defunct technology. Um, they've been around since the 1950s. Mine is not a 1950s era model. It's a modern pen plotter. But these have been around since the 1950s. And when inkjet printers came along and became widely available, everybody said, "Well, good, I can throw out my pen plotter because it's so much faster to just print a piece of paper on inkjet or on laserjet." And then the art community said, "There's something really special here in drawing with a pen, in an automated way." And it sort of got its second life that way. So that's fun. So that's the drawing time. Longer term than that, you saw the code that I wrote, the code there. And that takes several hours to create the system. And it's a very non-linear process of I have an idea in my head for how I want a piece to look. And so I'll start writing some algebra and trigonometry code to begin drawing that. I'll also sketch on paper. Here's aesthetically how I want something to look. Here's the math required to actually have a computer do that for me. And then I'll realize along the way, oh, there's a bug in my code, or I got my math wrong, right? And there's some iteration there that is very different from like working on a painting or other traditional media where you'll do sketches and thumbnails, and then you'll maybe do a color study, and then you'll do the final piece, and you lock in decisions along the way. This requires a lot more kind of changes that um, the piece, 1 or 2 hours into writing code will no look nothing like the final piece because you'll end up changing the system in such fundamental ways. It's really a surprise often what it'll end up looking like.
I have a quick question on that front. So you mentioned that you'll have an idea, but does that look like, oh, I have this code idea? Like, do you see it in like I wonder what it would look like if I did this thing in code? Or is it like you have a general visual idea that you're like, or is it more conceptual? I guess typically, where do you find that inspiration?
Yeah, it's often visual and aesthetic. It's sometimes conceptual, and every once in a while it's I want to visualize something about code that makes me excited. One example of that is I have a series called Decisions, and it's this chaotic flowchart that just goes every which way randomly, which flowcharts don't do that. Flowcharts are supposed to communicate information, but I thought to myself, what if a flowchart was art? So that was my prompt for myself. But in the case of like flow fields and other pieces like that, I think I have an idea in my head of what I would like something to look like, and I want to see. I want to see the emergence that comes from a system creating that for me, so that the kind of beautiful variety of that can come back.
Way cool. I see what you did there with the emergence portion. Well,
Yes, we will
I,
talk about that.
I can't wait to learn more. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. So let me blast through a few other slides, and then I'm going to hand it back to Jeremy, and we'll look at the pieces in these placats and in celebration of the hand this year. So, why generative art? We're just going to quickly touch on three things that make it exciting to me. First one is abstraction. I really enjoy 20th century and early 21st century abstract art. Um, it doesn't all speak to me, but when a piece of abstract art speaks to me and it really resonates with me, I get something extra out of it that's difficult for me to kind of articulate. It's almost like my brain had to work a little bit harder to like get the message or get the moral or get the artist's statement about this piece into my own head and into my own heart. And so that's special to me. It's exciting working in that space. Second one is control versus chaos. I come from a tech background and I write code every day, and I want the code at work to be as predictable and boring as possible. It needs to work the same way every time. I need to not be surprised at all about what the code does. And I even write something called unit tests that are baby programs that will run all the time to double check my work in the main program I'm working on for my employer to make sure that it's still predictable and that it didn't change in some unexpected way. uh, Control is so like central to writing business software. And art is not that way. We're often trying to We're trying to emulate nature. We're trying to emulate messy human relationships. We're trying to tell these stories that are about imperfection and are about chaos and are about an absence or a limit of control. And so there's something special about using computers in that way, where we inject a little bit of randomness into something that otherwise would be fully controlled and fully predictable. So I like that. And that leads to that third thing that Tiana and I have already started talking about a bit, which is emergence. And emergence is this idea of having a system of simple parts that when you combine them all, you get something that's more complex and more beautiful than the sum of its parts. My favorite example of emergence is birds flocking. You can actually you can do a pretty good computer simulation of birds flying around together in a flock. Let's see if I can remember the three rules by having three rules. And it's basically birds like to fly close to each other, but not too close to each other, generally the same direction. And those are the three rules. And if you write some code saying, draw some triangles, those represent abstract birds. And one of them is sort of in the front, and the other ones are sort of behind. And now just press play and see what happens. You get this sort of beautiful flocking pattern that emerges as a result of that. And there are clever things that you can do along the way, like have all the birds generally follow my mouse cursor, or have them follow a vector field, which we'll talk about with flow fields. And you get this beautiful emergence that comes from a really simple system of just three rules for your virtual birds, right? So emergence is a really kind of core tenet of generative art. Now let's blast through some artist names to look up. I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. And again, this is like go look these up on your own. I wish I could put more of their images up here. We don't have time for all of that. So the first one is Sol LeWitt. Sol LeWitt is not considered a generative artist, but his work really crosses over a lot. He's considered a conceptual artist. And here's a piece of his from 1971. Let me read you the title. Wall drawing number 118, 50 randomly placed points connected by straight lines. Now, the medium for this is a giant wall, right? It's several feet by several feet. Um, but what you won't know by just looking at this image is this was actually not rendered by Sol LeWitt. Sol LeWitt wrote up the title for this piece, which is also the instructions for this piece. And he handed it to a group of draftsmen, other artists that he asked to go and implement his work for him in a art gallery. And this image is from the Art Institute of Chicago. I believe this was the original implementation of this one. But Sol LeWitt would argue that this image is not the art. The instructions are the art. This idea that I can create some instructions and then have some draftsmen draw it for me, that's really interesting because they might implement it in different ways. If they were to do it 10 times, you'd get 10 different images. Or maybe the hand of the artist, the individual brushstrokes of Sol LeWitt, are less important than the idea that's in Sol LeWitt's head. Right. So that's this I think is one really clear illustration of how he thought about that. Here's another piece by LeWitt. This is wall drawing number 391. I left out the instruction. It's a little bit longer, but it's very simple. He was famous for using, he described it grammar. It's sort of these building blocks of his art that he would put together in lots of different ways to create these fun shapes and patterns. It's very sort of, um, I don't know, in the same way that like P.A. Mondrian earlier in the 20th century was doing these compositions with very simple palettes and just grids and things like that, focusing on kind of the beauty of form kind of removed from everything else. That's what LeWitt was interested in as well. And you will notice this grammar right here by LeWitt shows up in one of my series. So be looking for that later. Next is George Neise. I love this piece so much. This is some early procedural art or generative art. Uh, and so this was made with a pen plotter back in 1968. The piece is called Schotter, which is German for gravel. And my favorite thing about this piece is that it's really easy to see the algorithm. You've got a grid of these squares, and at the top, the grid is really neat and tidy. And then as you go down, the rotation of each of these things in the grid and the displacement, the moving around, starts to get more and more intense. And so this very even grid eventually falls apart at the end. So I love this piece. Here's some other great pioneers of computer art and generative art, Frieder Naka and Vera Molnar. And then here's some contemporary artists that are worth knowing about. Tyler Hobbs. There's so much that I could show from Tyler Hobbs. This particular piece, 100 Billion Sparks, was a commission that he did for Max Cooper, who's an electronic musician. And so this was a generative album cover, which I think is really beautiful. Max Cooper is famous for bringing in uh, like visual artists to create generative art that then gets projected in concert halls and in arenas where he goes and performs his music. And so, yeah, Tyler Hobbs and Max Cooper's music are really great to look up. Matt Delorier, he does some beautiful work. Here's a piece called Subscapes. This is number 257 in that series. These series get really large, right? Because you create the system, and that's where the labor goes, and then you can create all of these beautiful outputs that are all different from one another. And then here's Paul Rickards. He's one of my favorites. I would love to get a piece of his work eventually. This one's called Tangled CMY, right? Cyan, magenta, yellow, multiple density hatched squares. And it's this plot number that I won't read for you. Um, and so I love his use of color. He is famous for restoring vintage pen plotters from the 1980s, and then creating modern, contemporary art using Python and modern programming practices with those old machines. That's exciting. Okay, so that's my spiel for now. Let's switch back over now, and we can have more of a discussion and talk about this exhibition.
What? While he's pulling that up, do you use Python?
So I don't use Python for the most part. I use JavaScript and a
Oh,
dialect of JavaScript called TypeScript.
rad.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. I am gonna have so many questions that I would love to talk about. So let's this works. All right. I just want to go over all of the series that we have for the plakats. So he's gone over a few of these. The flow fields was the video that you showed. And so we have three parts to the plakat series of the 14 total. And flow fields is in three, and then we have another one in four, and then we have our third one in seven. So let me just go through these real quick, kind of give a rundown, and then we'll discuss them as a whole. So flow fields 2 of 3, progression, and then we have monuments, a little more structure, difference than the flow fields. And then we have reaction diffusion, which I would love to talk about some more. It is a fascinating process. As you can see, the growing, I don't know, amoeba, coral, whatever you want to call it, growing behind the Craft Lake City. So fascinating to watch. Let me just go through that real quick. Ah, so fun. Yeah, so those plakats are all going to be, like Tiana said, downtown on Broadway. And they are all lined up in those consecutive orders. You'll see this progression and change. And this is kind of the idea behind this emergence of something coming out, and you can kind of experience this as you go. Um, so Andrew, if you want to chime in, if you want to go over a specific one that maybe stands out to you, we can kind of discuss in further. I know flow fields was an important one to you if you want to kind of dive into that a little bit more. I think I have some follow-up questions I think we could go off of. So yeah, if you want to go over that a little bit more in depth, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, yeah, let's talk about flow fields first. One of my favorite things about this flow field series is that the inputs to the algorithm here never really get seen in the output. What I mean by that, you can see this in the info panel on the right hand of the right hand side of this image. What we do first is we create a vector field. We create a bunch of random angles. We've got arrows going every which way. And that's going to determine where these flow lines actually move. What we're actually doing is a connect the dots game where we'll pick some center place and then we'll move forward and move backward along these arrows. We'll go, I can't remember how many pixels at a time, 5 pixels at a time. We'll go 5 pixels along this arrow until maybe we'll bump into another arrow, change directions a bit, and move another 5 pixels. And from that very simple rule set, you get this emergence of what sort of looks like movement of wind or of water or maybe of like slot canyons in southern Utah, all from that kind of basic connect the dots game. And then the second one is choosing where those flow lines should begin. And so there are actually a bunch of invisible circles all around this canvas that determine where we begin drawing these lines. And that uses a technique called disk sampling. And so, yeah, like you don't see either of those algorithmic elements on the screen here, but they very much determine where everything is drawn.
You could also say that about nature. You kind of don't see the underlyings of it, the math, all the equations happening, but you kind of see the outcome, which is yeah, is what you kind of end up seeing here, this organic life coming to fruition, which is I think one of the most fascinating parts. I do have like on top of this, I don't know if this is like a jumping question, but do you have any idea like kind of what the philosophical implications are of this, how people will perceive this kind of information and the way that we kind of proceed into understanding how much, technology and math is in nature and art in general, and what that might, I don't know, what that might mean with art in general going forward.
Yeah. I've got some jumbled thoughts on that. Let me do my best to kind of organize them. I think the first one that comes to mind is this idea that nature is computation. What I mean by that is think about how nature, organisms are made up of DNA and they're made up of cell structures, and there's a certain amount of kind of like mechanical, computational stuff that happens that's programmed at this tiny little level of all these things, right? Being able to replicate DNA and RNA back and um, cells dividing, all that kind of stuff. Um, that like reaching for computers and digital computation to emulate that almost feels like kind of a return to trying to understand nature better. I have heard, for example, that scientists will study nature as a means to actually make software better. For example, there's been studies on how do ants behave, how do bees behave for the purpose of making software more fault tolerant. So if you're a data warehouse and you have a bazillion little server computers crammed into nooks and crannies of this data center, and then there is a partial power outage or there's some problem in parts of it. How can you heal the system quickly? Like, how can you shift work from one chunk over to another while you bring it back up? These are things that you see in these like very simple creatures that we can learn from, right? And use in software even.
That is amazing. I mean, I feel like I've understood that to an extent, but hearing that out loud, yeah, it's beautiful because I think we do find a lot of the, really good, equations and solutions nature has already done. And I think something important to show about technology is like we're bringing life into it instead of it being like this cold, dreary place. There can be a lot of life and connection to it.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Yeah.
This may be a really good segue into reactions. Should we maybe talk
Yeah,
about the organic shapes that show up there?
definitely. I think that would be great. Let's do it.
Great. So maybe first I should mention, do you see Solowitz' grammar right here? you see these boxes of vertical, horizontal, diagonal lines. So that was there, and then the blob, the amoeba, begins to take over, right? So I wanted to show a demo of how that actually gets created. Actually, Jeremy, do you mind jumping to like part 4 or part 5? I think we can maybe look at that for a moment and notice how we've got the blob covering up the boxes, and that blob has grown over time. There's kind of two main chunks of that blob. The first one is centered inside of craft, the word craft, and then the other one was centered just under the word city, and it wraps across the canvas to show up at the top, like a asteroids style. If you're a fan of, the 1970s arcade game. Someday I will own a cabinet of that. But yeah, so we've got these two blobs and they grow, and it's a simulation of that. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and I want to show you the simulation that actually creates that. We can talk about the process in between. So, let's see, where did my Firefox has gone missing? Here it is. Cool. So let me. Well, I'm in this reaction diffusion playground right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click restart, and you'll see this pattern emerge. And it's just growing organically, right? Now I'm gonna clear the screen here and I'm gonna slow it down a little bit. And I'm also going to draw my own shape here. It ends up looking a little different and less symmetrical than what you saw before. But you can see how, hopefully you can see my cursor as I do this, uh, these black portions begin to interact with each other, and then they split apart to make white portions in between. And so there's this interaction between chemical A and chemical B. They react with one another and they diffuse, they spread out across the canvas. And there's a real hairy differential equation. So get out your calculus textbooks. I didn't have to write the calculus for this. Turns out that the person that came up with the calculus for this, well, the person that came up with the equation for this is none other than Alan Turing. So if you've seen The Imitation Game, if you've heard of Turing complete systems, if you've heard of the church Turing thesis, all of these things, the halting problem, yeah, that guy, Alan Turing. Also, in a little bit of spare time in the 1950s, he was like, by the way, here's how nature works. Reaction diffusion. Just kidding. But he was like, you can model a lot of how small cell processes work with this sort of chemical A, chemical B reaction diffusion model. And so again, the way this works is you've got chemical A, which gets dropped onto a canvas at some feed rate. You see this like feed rate up here, and it diffuses at some rate. So that's D of A, diffusion of A. And then chemical A can be consumed and eaten up by chemical B, and then it also diffuses, spreads across the canvas. And then over time, chemical B gets killed off. And so these slider settings determine the behavior of the simulation. And actually, if I choose some of these presets and then just hit restart, you'll notice it's same algorithm, right? Same reaction and diffusion, but it's behaving so differently. Let's switch it again. And let's switch it again, right? Here's the one that I used. I used this with a little bit of tweaking here. Mazes, fingerprints. This is imitating like your own fingerprint. It's mesmerizing to watch. Soon after I shared this with a coworker, and then a week or two went by, and he sent me a video back, and he said, Andrew, I was at a Devo concert, and the visualization that they had behind the screen behind them on the screen was reaction to fusion. Like Devo was actually showing this on screen because it's so mesmerizing to watch these simulations.
It
Yeah,
kind
it's
of looks like a
amazing.
human brain.
It kind of does, like the wrinkles and folds. Yeah.
Yeah. So would chemical B be the paper or is it something else? Because if chemical A is like the ink or whatever the black is that right? Then what would chemical B be?
So I believe chemical B is actually no, if I remember correctly, the black and white portions are actually the difference between the amount of B and the amount of A. So you could still have a lot of A or a lot of B.
Hmm.
When you have a lot of both or very little of both, you actually end up with gray. You'll notice that I'm using this coloring style. If I choose this and rerun it, restart, it looks a lot more kind of blurry and fuzzy. But this is more accurate to what the simulation is doing. There are these gray areas where you get kind of these borders where you've got lower differences between the two chemicals.
Way cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've looked at this simulation. The way that we went from this simulation to the image that we saw, let me pull up a copy on my end. Here we go. Is and actually let me oh, it's going to erase that. Sorry. So the way that we got to here is I grabbed a snapshot of that image. That's raster graphics, meaning like it's a JPEG with pixels inside. I grabbed that and I used a tracing algorithm in Inkscape, or you could use Illustrator, traced around that, and that created the lines that the pen plotter could follow. So you'll notice that uh, in the blob, there are no black sections and light sections. You're only seeing the outlines of those, right? That was a stylistic choice that we ended up making. But in the future, I'd be curious to see what would it look like if I traced the insides? Um, how would the artifacting of the pen plotter marks influence that? What I mean by that is you'll notice that we've also got the Craft Lake City logo type on the canvas. And if I scroll in, you'll notice that this is not just like a solid neatly printed neatly printed fill. I had to go in and create a hatch fill where, every so many millimeters, it would draw another horizontal line. And the pen plotter like ran out of a little bit of ink down here, and it's a little bit thicker. There's like a blot right here, right? You get all these kind of quirky artifacting going on right here. And you even see it in the blobs too, right? Like you see it there and there. And so what I'm trying to say is whatever artifacting you see here while filling in this logo, you would also see that in here. And it would be interesting to see would that add to that piece or would it detract from it? And depending on how you filled it, like if you did horizontal lines or vertical lines, or if you did crosshatch in diagonals, or if you traced from outside to inside, there are all these different ways you could do it, and you'd end up with different artifacts as a result because you're working with a pen plotter. Those are all, decisions that the artist ends up making, even though the simulation is kind of out of your hands. Okay, so oh, Jeremy, I see you unmuting.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I just wondered if you wanted to go over anything else on that specifically, but yeah, it's so fascinating. I could ask so many questions. I'm so curious what you think about within this realm. Like it's just um I know that you love Saul LeWitt, and I feel like that's important for reasons like, do you find him to be like this important kind of idea going into what this all kind of entails? Like, because I think people can look at somebody like Saul LeWitt back in the day and they can see an art form, right? But it's like the same thing. But with computers and generative art, people are a little more dismissive and saying like, this isn't art, this is something else. And so I think someone like Saul LeWitt, he's showing the same thing, but it kind of has this different presence. Um, I guess what I'm asking in that sense is like, what do you see how we, I guess, represent this information and why it's important to kind of share it in a way that people can understand that there's this human connection and a relationship with it instead of it being, doing everything for you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's this question maybe foremost is how important is the hand of the artist? And I think it depends on the medium, depends on what you're trying to do. Um, I have so much respect for traditional artists that are creating beautiful pieces. The amount of training that is required, the amount of virtuosity in order to really nail a piece, really express, for example, in oil painting, express a figure, express a form in a very low number of strokes is incredible. Um, and I don't have that skill. That's not my background. I can appreciate it. Um, I'm kind of gradually becoming involved in more and more artistic circles where I get to interact with those folks and appreciate their work. Um, I think that I think that virtuosity and the hand of the artist are less exciting to me personally than maybe they are to others, and that's okay. Some of the other music that I really enjoy listening to is ambient music, generative music, synthesizer drone music, where a lot of it has to do with kind of creating a system and then letting it run itself. The great Brian Eno is one of the pioneers of generative music, and has lots of great things to say about uh, the genre of ambient music is special because it's as listenable as it is ignorable. It's you can choose to listen to it and focus on it, and there's this depth to its beauty, uh, or you can choose to ignore it, and it's like a beautiful backdrop to what you're doing. His Music for Airports album from 1974, I think, is just this beautiful piece of music, that it's not it's not, as many notes as possible. It's not virtuosic at all, but it's just so beautiful, right? The viewer's experience or the listener's experience is at the forefront of that. I think that there's a step further than I think what I'm describing, which is uh, let's open up the can of worms and talk about AI art or AI images imitating art. And I think that there's a difference here between an artist that is creating generative art, computational art, procedural art by creating a system and curating the behavior of the system and then gardening what comes out of that system. That I think is a collaboration between an artist and a system. AI art, I think, is different because number one, the inputs are so different. Rather than really thoughtfully creating a system that then emerges into art outputs, you're writing in prompts, you're typing text, and the system in between has already been created for you. It's been trained on the work of thousands and thousands of artists, most likely without their consent, and there are a host of ethical issues with that. And then an image pops out the other end, probably with too many fingers, probably with other, problems. The finger thing will get fixed over time, but the ethical issues with those, I think will remain so long as artists uh, are not able to give their consent for training these models. And I think that somebody that types in a prompt, maybe they're a prompt engineer, but I think it sure is difficult to consider them an artist, at least for that piece of work, because the system's complete. The system is doing its thing, and they're feeding it some text. So I think it's important to kind of see AI art as a step removed uh, from like more traditional forms of computational art.
I guess in that sense, where do you see generative art going?
Um, so I think that this is going to tie into to my previous thoughts. I think that the use of AI will influence other generative art strongly. Um, one piece of AI art, I will commit to calling this one art, that I've really loved, is a piece by, let me make sure I get the name correct. Um, this way you can look it up. By Refik Anadol, in the New York City Museum of Modern Art. And it was this beautiful piece. It was an installation piece that was animated. Um, and the way that it worked was an AI model, like a diffusion model, like Midjourney, would create some landscape images, but you never saw the landscape images. Then what would happen to the viewer's perspective is this beautiful fluid simulation, like particle simulation, would move all of these flowing particles across the screen in order to sort like approximate that image. And so you never end up seeing this AI generated landscape. You only end up seeing these flowing particles that are being influenced by that composition, right? And so in the same way that like we talked about that flow fields piece, there's this disk sampling, there's this vector field, but you never see that stuff. Those AI images influencing Anadol's work, you don't see those, right? It's this input into this other beautiful system that he created that powered what the viewer sees. So I'm looking forward to more things like that in generative art, where we've now got like a new kind of input into a curated system.
Awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. Cool, thank you. Tiana, did you have a question?
Oh yeah, I just one short comment is I just love how you really redefined not only like in your artwork as a whole, but especially like this visual representation, this series, the hand of the artist being kind of that the person who kind of orchestrates and designs everything kind of behind the scenes of like the artwork is the code itself, but then there's this visual representation of it that is you utilize this like tool to then express that which is just really cool in the way that you kind of, I don't know, described and kind of redefined what that means.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important, and I think it's special that other folks can interact with it as well. You know, I like when at the Craft Lake City DIY Fest, I was able to bring an iPad to my booth and set that up, and we had kids coming in and trying out the algorithms that I created, and it's a blast to get to see people interact with that and really curate what they want to see.
Awesome. Yeah, it was amazing seeing it out action at the DIY Fest. I loved it. I could watch it for hours. It literally had so much life in it. It was great.
It's so meditative. And my final question, if we have, since we have about 2 minutes, is how do you hope the public interacts with or experiences emergence?
I hope that as they walk past it, number one, I hope they recognize that it's an animation, and I hope that that gets them excited about moving back and forth and like seeing the keyframes. Um, that was such an exciting challenge for me in creating the pieces. Um, and so I hope they see that. And then I hope that they also look at these abstract works and say, this feels familiar to me. Um, you know, it would be so special if somebody walked past the reactions series and say, this totally reminds me of my fingerprint, and there's something eerie and special about that, you know, or walking past the monument series, and there's some construction happening on the buildings behind those placats right now, or at least there was a month ago when these went up. And I hope that they look at that and think, wow, there's something beautiful about an under construction building and this sort of idea of like a city constantly being under construction and being incomplete and growing. And I hope that they look at flow fields and say there's something familiar about this. Like this reminds me of a contour map, or it reminds me of like it reminds me of this one I don't know, a fishing trip or a rafting trip or something that I experienced, and that was like a special moment for me or memory for me that this is evoked. You know, I would love for people to have those sorts of experiences with these.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Well, that is the time. So I just want to kind of wrap it up a little bit. I just wanted to say thank you again, Andrew, for just being part of this. It's been awesome working with you, and the outcome was amazing. And I could talk to you about this stuff for hours and hours. You're just full of so much awesome knowledge that I just love learning from. So I appreciate you sharing everything with us. And then just a quick, shout out to our sponsors to kind of help us with this program. You know, it's community efforts, and we just want to share with the community. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to mention, Tiana, before we get out of here. But
No, just thank you again for partnering with us on this really cool project. It's an honor to work with you and work towards like just expanding the definition of what creativity and artwork can look like, and work toward inspiring the Utah in general. So yeah, just shout out to Andrew and Jeremy for all of your hard work in making this happen. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for letting me be a part of this.
thanks,
And if
Andrew.
anyone hasn't checked it out yet, they're live on the streets of downtown Salt Lake City right now. Jeremy, if you want to go to the next slide with the map on
Oh,
it.
yes, I do. Wait, so, oh, the
Oh,
last
the
slide.
previous
This one,
slide.
yep.
Yes. There are 14 beautiful plakats created by Andrew, on view right now on 300 South, otherwise known as Broadway, between 200 West and Main. So you should definitely go check it out. It will be taken down in October.
Andrew, thank you again so much. Excited to do another project with you in the future. I think this is like an important topic, especially with our technology these days. So I really appreciate you putting everything into this and sharing everything with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, would love to work with Craft Lake City again.
Cool. All right, well, that's everything. So we'll call it there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.